Starting off at number 10, going to number 1, we have being slothful. Now, the term sloth is just a refusal to work or even put in any effort into anything. So it's pretty much laziness. Now, in the Bible, Solomon wrote about sloth in the book of Proverbs chapter 6 verses 6, and that says, "Go to the ant, you sluggard, consider her ways and be wise." Sluggard is just another word for saying somebody is lazy or slothful. Also in the book of Matthew chapter 25 verses 26, Jesus talks about a parable of a servant who was evil because he was just slothful. He refused to work. The thing at number 9 is greed. Greed, of course, is just a selfish desire for something, regardless of if it's for power or food or wealth, anything. And the Bible does speak about this. Christianity teaches to completely avoid this. And in the book of Hebrews chapter 13 verses 5 in the Bible, it says, "Let your conduct be without covetousness, be content with such things as you have. For he himself has said, I will never leave you nor forsake you." Now, the Bible does speak about this in other different places, like in the book of Exodus, chapter 20, verses 17, as well as also the book of Ecclesiastes, also written by Solomon, chapter 5, verses 10. Number 8 brings us eating in excess, and the term gluttony is used to describe this. In the book of 1 Corinthians, chapter 10, verses 31 in the New Testament of the Bible, there's a passage that says this, "Therefore, whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do all to the glory of God." So of course, excessive eating is damaging to the body, and that doesn't glorify God if you're actually hurting yourself. Then in the book of Proverbs in the Old Testament, specifically in chapter 23 verses 19 to 21, it says, "Listen, my son, and be wise, and set your heart on the right path. Do not join those who drink too much wine or gorge themselves on meat, for drunkards and gluttons become poor, and drowsiness clothes them in rags." The next haram thing in Christianity is being envious of others. Envy is a feeling of being either discontent or being resentful towards somebody else that has something that you want. In the Bible, it does talk about this in the book of Proverbs, chapter 14, verses 30. "A sound heart is life to the body, but envy is rottenness to the bones." Wrath comes in at number 6. This is also something that is forbidden. Now, being angry is one thing, but wrath is extreme anger towards another person, just like uncontrollable anger. The Bible mentions this in the book of Romans chapter 12 verses 19, and that passage says, "Beloved, never avenge yourself, but leave it to the wrath of God, for it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord." Christians are taught this because they may not always see the bigger picture. Just leave God to provide punishment for people who do wrong and reward those who do good. It's not in all cases necessarily up to people to execute judgment. We have slandering women, and this is mentioned in the Quran, specifically in Surah 24 verses 23, and this is what it says. "Indeed, those who falsely accuse chaste, unaware, and believing women are cursed in this world and the hereafter, and they will have a great punishment." Next up at number 4, we are looking at the sin of bribery. Now, the Quran talks about this in Surah 2 verses 188. It says, "And do not consume one another's wealth unjustly or send it in bribery to the rulers in order that they might aid you to consume a portion of the wealth of the people in sin while you know it is unlawful." So avoid all kind of bribes. If you know something is like really wrong and illegal and just inhumane, don't be accepting money from it. Perhaps if you guys want, we can dive a little bit more in another episode. But let's move on now to sin number 3, and this is drinking alcohol, a pretty big one, and most people who aren't even Muslim know this about the religion of Islam. This is like a big sin. Avoid alcohol, but not just alcohol, any intoxicants. And in the Quran, Surah 5 verses 90, it says, "O you who have believed, indeed, intoxicants, gambling, sacrificing on stone altars to other than Allah, divining arrows are but defilement from the work of Satan. So avoid it that you may be successful." So again, that passage mentioned multiple things, but the thing that stood out there was really avoiding intoxicants. The next big sin at number 2 is adultery and
fornication. Again, this is something that even non-Muslims are very familiar with when it comes to the religion of Islam, one of the things that are forbidden. And we find reference to this in the Quran, Surah 17 verses 32. And what does it say? It says this, "And do not approach unlawful sexual intercourse. Indeed, it is ever an immorality and is evil as a way." And we reached number 1 in this episode. Now, this is one that a lot of people don't necessarily take into consideration, but it's a sin of committing suicide. This is also a very big one in the religion of Islam. In the Quran, Surah 4 verses 29, it says this, "O you who have believed, do not consume one another's wealth unjustly, but only in lawful business by mutual consent. And do not kill yourself or one another. Indeed, Allah is to you ever merciful." So again, it doesn't matter how bad life seems to go or how much you're currently suffering right now. In the religion of Islam, you're advised to not take your own life because that is a sin.
Eating carrion, blood, or pork meat. The Quran is very clear about which meats are acceptable for consumption and which meats are considered sinful if eaten. It is a commonly known fact that followers of Islam must not eat pork products or meat that is still bloody and has not been thoroughly cooked. It is also forbidden to eat carrion, or decaying flesh of dead animals. Any meat that is consumed must also be halal, meaning the meat has been slaughtered and prepared as prescribed by Muslim law. Now, I found it very interesting that the Quran does mention that if one is in a state of starvation and has absolutely no choice but to eat these meats out of pure desperation and survival, that Allah is forgiving and merciful. In Surah 16, Ayah 115, the Holy Quran states that Allah has forbidden you only carrion and blood and the flesh of swine, also any animal over which the name of any other than Allah has been pronounced. But whoever eats of them under compelling necessity, neither desiring it nor exceeding the limit of absolute necessity, surely for such action Allah is much forgiving and most merciful. Alright, moving on to talking about the making of statues and pictures. Allah describes himself as the Almighty and original creator through titles such as Al-Khaliq, the creator of everything out of nothingness, and Al-Fatir, the bringer into existence, giving every living thing its particular nature, objective, and meaning. Now, there are many hadiths that discuss the sin of producing statues and pictures to imitate human form. These hadiths state that the image makers are cursed. They are called some of the most evil creations. They will be most severely punished on the Day of Judgment, and they will be punished until they breathe life into their creations. However, they will never be able to do that, and the angels will not enter houses in which there are statues. It is also believed that if a person, or an artist, really wanted to depict or create the essence of a human being by means of either painting or sculpture, he will then have encroached upon the rights and authority that belong to only Allah. And it is believed that those who compete with Allah in creation will receive the greatest punishment on the Day of Judgment, for that is a blasphemous act. Let's talk about marital relations. So there is some discussion about a wife refusing to engage in marital relations with her husband. On the basis of the following hadith, it is generally understood that if a wife refuses relations with her husband, she will be cursed by the angel. Abu Huraira reports from the Prophet that when a husband calls his wife to bed and she refuses, and as a result the husband spends the night in anger, then angels curse the wife all night until dawn. Bukhari. Interestingly, in Islam, it is believed that a husband and wife protect the chastity of one another by providing one another a legitimate means of satisfying their physical urges. This protection of chastity is essential for the preservation of the family unit. Hence, anything which puts chastity in jeopardy is disliked by the Almighty. However, it's important to mention that the basis of refusal by the husband or wife must also be taken into consideration. For example, if either of them is tired, sick, or simply not in the proper mood and in the appropriate frame of mind, then it certainly does not entail any wrath of the Almighty. It is only when a spouse starts to deliberately evade such natural needs of the other that the attitude becomes questionable. Fact number 7, the sin of spying and eavesdropping on others' private conversations. So according to Islam, it is not permissible to engage in namimah, which is malicious gossip, and spying on private conversations. Namimah is considered a major sin as it involves sharing what others have said in order to cause trouble among them. The definition of namimah is also uncovering secrets and disclosing that which is not appropriate to disclose. Hence, followers of Islam should keep silent and refrain from telling everything that they see of people's situations, unless speaking of it will bring some benefit to a Muslim or to ward off some harm. This can be seen in the Quran, Surah 49, Ayah 12, where it is said, "O ye who believe, avoid suspicion as much as possible. For suspicion in some cases is a sin, and spy not on each other behind their backs. Would any of you like to eat the flesh of his dead brother? Nay, ye would abhor it. But fear Allah, for Allah is oft returning, most merciful." It is also narrated in Al-Sahihain from Abu Hurairah that the Prophet said, "Beware of suspicion, for suspicion is the falsest of speech. Do not eavesdrop, do not spy on one another, do not envy one another, do not forsake one another, do not hate one another. Be, O slaves of Allah, brothers." Al-Bukhari. Next, we'll be talking about the sin of women appearing like men and vice versa. So according to Islam, Allah's curse is upon women who appear like men and upon men who appear like women. In his book, Lawful and the Prohibited in Islam, Yusuf al-Qaradawi, the prominent religious scholar, writes, "The Prophet declared that a woman should not wear a man's clothing or vice versa. He cursed men who imitate women and women who imitate men." Furthermore, the evil of such conduct, which affects both the life of the individual and that of the society, is that it constitutes a rebellion against the natural order of things. According to this natural order, there are men and there are women, and each of the two sexes has its own distinctive characteristics. However, if men become effeminate and women masculinized, this natural order will be reversed and will disintegrate. It is believed that among those who are cursed by Allah and his angels, both in this world and in the hereafter, the Prophet has mentioned that a man whom Allah has created as male, but who becomes effeminate by imitating women, and a woman whom Allah has created as female, but who becomes masculinized by imitating men. For this reason, the Prophet forbade men from wearing clothes or things pertaining to women.
Moving on now to number 5, worshiping false gods. People used to worship more than one god in the past. Agriculture was their main source of living, so they developed the concept of agricultural gods of fertility and worshiped them, as well as various other gods were created. And Judaism prohibits idolatry and considers it an act of betrayal of God's relationship with humanity. Now, when we look in the book of Exodus chapter 20 verses 2 to 4, we find these words, "I am the Lord thy God, thou shalt not have other gods before me, and thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image." So yes, it is haram in Judaism to visit and worship false gods and abandon the Jewish heritage. Number 4 leads us to incest. One of the things that both modern science and ancient people agreed on is that intimate relations between closely related people could result in biologically flawed offspring. Yeah, whole lot of stuff can happen there. In many societies, including the Hebrew society, strict laws existed and still exist where they put restrictions on who people can marry and be intimate with. It is said in the book of Leviticus chapter 8 verses 16, "None of you shall approach anyone near of kin to uncover nakedness. I am the Lord." Men are forbidden to have intercourse with their daughters, granddaughters, sisters, mothers, and vice versa because it is just straight up haram. Also, homosexuality is a big haram thing in Judaism. The Bible speaks strongly about homosexuality. It says in Leviticus chapter 18 verses 22, "Ye shall not lie with a male as with a woman. It is an abomination." And by the way, the term abomination comes from the Hebrew word that means disgusting thing. Traditionally, Judaism has seen that homosexual male intercourse and not homosexuality in and of itself itself as contrary to Judaism. And this belief is still maintained by Orthodox Judaism. So having the homosexual desire isn't haram, but just acting on it according to Judaism is haram. Number 2 brings us to laying with animals. It's also said in the book of Leviticus chapter 18 verses 23, "Ye shall not have intimate relations with any animal and defile yourself with it, nor shall any woman give herself to an animal to have intimate relations with it. It is a perversion." Now, back in the day, some tribesmen, they used to perform these terrible acts with animals, but it is considered one of the worst haram things in Judaism. Now, number 1 leads us to child sacrifices. Now, if you were asked what's the most precious thing in your life that you would protect at all costs, most people will say it's their children. Yeah, well, people of ancient times, they were also no different. But they did do some terrible things when it came to children. During the bad times, they used to actually offer their children as a sacrifice to whatever god they were worshiping, especially the eldest male child. And this was done as a last desperate plea for help. Now, the Bible forbids Jews to sacrifice their children. In the book of Leviticus 18 verse 21, we find this passage, "You shall not give any of your children to sacrifice them to Moloch, and so profane the name of your God. I am the Lord."